Generally, the abortion debate has two sides. Those who are against abortion call themselves pro life because they think that life starts at conception and it is wrong to kill it. We are talking about human life here. And then there is pro choice side, which keeps the pregnant woman's choice at the center. On this view, abortion is permissible if the woman wants it to be done. David Benatar in Better Never to Have Been proposed a third view, what he called as pro-death view. I prefer to call it pro-abortion view, but the idea is that before a fetus becomes sentient, it is morally obligatory to abort it. Pro-abortion view is not famous in most of the world, but I would guess that most of antinatalists would agree with it, especially those who think that sentience is an important consideration in their antinatalism. I said most of the antinatalists because not all antinatalists agree to the pro-abortion view. In fact, there are prominent antinatalists who are against abortion who think that abortion is morally impermissible, while at the same time also think that having children is also morally impermissible. One such antinatalist philosopher is Julio Cabrera, whose article No Need to Feel will be featured in the upcoming Cambridge Quarterly Healthcare Ethics issue. On his view, there is no contradiction between thinking that having children is wrong and abortion is also wrong. Sentiocentric antinatalists draw a line on achievement of sentience by the fetus. This is a very blurred line ranging from 22 to 28 weeks in gestation, but before that, they think aborting the fetus does not harm it as it is not sentient and therefore it is not morally relevant. But Cabrera says that this condition of sentience to decide whether the fetus is morally relevant or not is unnecessary. That's why the title No Need to Feel. The fact that the one we abort, meaning the fetus, does not have sentience and does not suffer is totally irrelevant. Non-sentient could also mean someone who lacks consciousness or someone who can't feel pain at that particular moment. And so if we base our abortion stance on the attribute of non-sentience, then taken literally, this would mean that we have no ethical obligations to people in a coma, semi-conscious or unconscious elderly people, or people who are sleeping. But we have a strong intuition that it is morally wrong to kill people in their sleep, even if they are not sentient and will not suffer in their deaths. But the difference, you might say, is that these people already exist, although they may not be conscious or sentient at that particular moment. Well, then it's not about sentience or non-sentience. They are different to fetus because the fetus is not yet sentient. In the specific case of abortion, what justifies the pro-abortion position is not strictly that what is eliminated does not have consciousness, but the fact that it does not yet acquire it. I call fetuses not yet sentient beings to differentiate them from other cases. Julio presents 5 arguments against abortion of these not yet sentient beings. One is the paradox in the argument based on sentience. You are stopping someone from fulfilling the very criteria which you say should be fulfilled for moral consideration. Fetuses are not yet sentient, but if they are not aborted, they will achieve sentience. So you can't use sentience as a reason to abort them. This is like punishing someone for not reading books after having burned their library, or like arresting someone for not paying taxes while they can't pay taxes because they have been imprisoned. Fetus does not have the property of sentience, and it is precisely the act of abortion that prevents the fetus from acquiring the property it is criticized for lacking. Same is with the case of identity, which the fetus lacks. The fetus can be aborted because it does not have a definite identity. It is not someone in particular, but it is precisely the act of abortion that prevents that fetus from acquiring the identity. Both identity and sentience are from the perspective of the fetus. This is the first person perspective or the internal point of view of ourselves. Cabrera says that we just don't exist in the first person. We also exist in the thoughts and minds of others, which is the third person perspective, an external view from which we are observed. Cabrera argues that this third person view is also important when considering moral relevance. Moral relevance is not an intrinsic property of a being, but something that is or is not recognized by others. The fetus is a special case. It does not have the first person perspective yet, but it has come into existence in the eyes of others and so has this third person perspective. In other words, during gestation, the fetus is a being for others, but since it is not conscious or sentient, it is still not a being for themselves. Abortion prevents a pure being for others from ever acquiring a being for themselves. The fact that the aborted person person does not have first person sentience is totally irrelevant. Now, I want to add a clarification to this, which is not in the article by Cabrera. We can argue this about imaginary beings like Spider-Man or even gods. Spider-Man does not exist in the material body. He only exists in the minds and thoughts of people. Can this third person perspective be enough for us to offer moral consideration to Spider-Man? The difference is that the Spider-Man will never come into existence. He will never acquire a first person point of view of himself. But in case of fetus, that is not the case unless it is aborted. And if you construct some thought experiment in which Spider-Man will indeed come into existence in future, but we prevent that right now, then the case comes closer to abortion, in which case Cabrerian antinatalists may oppose such abortion of Spider-Man. And I'm glossing over a nuance where fetus is still a material organism, unlike the immaterial idea of Spider-Man. Anyway, coming to Cabrera's article, he also raises the question on those who do the abortion. He uses the general term called aborters, so I'm not sure if he's talking about the medical professionals who help with abortion, or the doctors who actually do the abortion, or the pregnant women who want to get abortion done, or the people in general who hold some kind of pro-abortion view. But for simplicity, I'm going to assume it is the doctors who are doing the abortion. These are adult humans and so sentient and conscious beings. Not only are they conscious, but they also have a moral agency. That is the capacity to decide between the right and wrong. Cabrera raises doubts on whether they are using this capacity when they are performing abortions. Every normal human being is conscious in the sense of having an opening to the world while awake, but not every normal human being acts consciously with full insight into what they are doing. A supporting point to this comes from the fact that Cabrera does not want to criminalize abortions because that just increases the chances that abortions will be performed in the most terrible conditions, where it is not difficult to perceive that the state of consciousness in which people find themselves in abortion situations is not one full of discernment or of emotional balance and full rational control. So this is a judgment on the aborters that when they do abortions, they may not always know whether what they're doing is morally right thing or not. This may sound a little controversial, but even a pro-abortion antinatalist would agree with this. That's because most of those doctors who perform abortions are not motivated by antinatalist arguments. They are mostly pro-choice doctors, which is different than the antinatalist arguments. I don't have statistical data to prove this, but this is my general impression. Another criticism of pro-abortion view is that many antinatalists implicitly assume that the fetus wants to be aborted, meaning right now it is not sentient or conscious, but once it does become conscious, it is in their interest to have been aborted to avoid being thrown into suffering of life. Cabrera says that there are two problems with this. One, we are moving away from the fact of fetus not being sentient right now, and two, we are constructing a counterfactual case of projecting our preference on the potential interests of the fetus. But an opposite case can also be made. If the fetus is factually non-sentient, it can be counterfactually represented as someone with feelings and reasons enough to express their preferences to be born despite everything, and consequently as disproving of their own abortion. So antinatalists are imposing death on someone who cannot express their preference or give their consent. This is manipulation and using someone as a means. The abortion is a manipulative act, treating the aborted as a means even when the aborted person does not feel this manipulation in the first person. Cabrera accuses of pro-abortion people having doubts about their moral stance. That's because in their language they are defending abortion rather than celebrating it. They use expressions like it is not immoral, it is not wrong, it is advisable, it does not harm anyone, it can be practiced, and similar. They do not say that abortion is a marvelous act or even a good act or a virtuous or moral act. In summary, Cabrera presents these 5 arguments against abortion. 1. The formal paradox that you are using lack of sentience as an excuse to stop the fetus from achieving that sentience. 2. The fetus exists in the third person perspective even though it may not yet exist in the first person. 3. Aborters' moral judgment can be questioned. 4. We can't construct a counterfactual case based on an implicit premise of preferring abortion. And 5. Abortion is manipulation and treats the fetus as a means. Now, just to note that personally, I am a pro-abortion anti antinatalist, and I don't agree with the points that Julio Cabrera is making. But Cabrera is a well qualified and a learned philosopher, and I won't make myself of a Dunning-Kruger's fool here. I'm just reporting about the topics on antinatalism. Another paper in the same quarterly issue was by Karim Akirma, Sentience, Not Necessarily a Problem. Karim Akirma himself is a well-known antinatalist, but in this paper he points to a particular nuance in the antinatalist moral theory. Sentience is important to sentiocentric antinatalists, and usually when we say sentience, we mean some capacity to feel pain or feel some negative sensations. This pain is crucial for us to survive. It tells us where the dangers are and how to avoid them. If I don't feel pain after I have a bleeding wound on my leg, I may not notice it and eventually die from loss of blood. So, pain compels me to do something about it, and therefore we think of it as a guardian of life. Same is the case with other animals and our ancestors from evolutionary history. Those who felt pain were able to preserve themselves and pass on their genes. Those who did not develop this capacity to feel pain eventually died out from the tree of life. So, we tend to think that the first sensation which would have appeared in our ancient ancestors must be to feel some kind of pain. We also think that when an individual embryo is developing in its mother's womb, the first sensation it might get would be that of pain, as that is such an important factor in our evolution. Karim questions both these assumptions. He goes into relative details of many organisms from single-celled to few-celled to organized beings like jellyfish to higher animals like humans to evaluate aspects of consciousness and sensations. On this, he postulates that there could have been a neutral sensation or even a positive sensation which developed before the negative one. Even in embryonic development, it may be possible for the fetus to develop a neutral sensation before pain. The question is, what has this to do with antinatalism? Well, if it were the case that some organisms develop neutral or positive sensations before the evolved sensations of pain, then it is also possible that some of them survive till today based on their environments. Jellyfish could be one such example, where the whole body could be thought of as a brain instead of one particular cluster of neurons within the body. The assumption that jellyfish do not feel pain but are nonetheless rudimentarily conscious also implies that fortunately pain as the guardian of life does not have to be present for a species to be successful. This means that the set of all sentient beings could be much larger than the set of all sentient beings capable of suffering. This in turn means that the creation of sentient beings incapable of suffering might be permissible even according to the antinatalist moral theory. Despite this, Karim advises to err on the side of caution when dealing with living beings. Even if these deliberations suggest that the set of all sentient beings may be larger than the set of all sentient beings capable of suffering, this does not affect the central claim of antinatalist moral theory. Of course, in our dealings with organisms, we should always follow the heuristic of caution. We should attribute too high rather than too low a degree of negative sentience to organisms and regard them as living beings, meaning conscious or sentient beings. Center for Social Justice is a center-right British think tank founded more than 20 years ago. They are organizing the birth gap debate on 16th June at 6:30 p.m., which I presume is the UK time. The panel will have Claire Coutinho, who is a shadow minister, Josh Simmons, a Labour MP, Miriam Cates from GB News, which I think is a right-wing media outlet, and Fraser Nelson, a columnist at The Times. The debate will be focused on Britain's declining fertility rates and will dig deeper into questions like, is low fertility primarily cultural, economic, or policy driven? Can immigration meaningfully offset demographic decline? And what does this mean for the future of social contract? So, not exactly a philosophical debate, but more from a sociological point of view. Still, it will be interesting to see what they say about this. Center for Social Justice also have a YouTube channel, and I expect that the debate will be uploaded there, but we'll see nearer the time. Talking of philosophical debates and discussions on YouTube, David Benatar was interviewed for the 5th time by Ricardo Lopez on The Dissenter, this time about his 2017 book, The Human Predicament. They talk about what the predicament is, how it is different than the predicament of other animals, the predicament of other animals, the role of meaning in life, and Benatar's formulations of cosmic versus terrestrial meanings, quality of life, suffering, transhumanism, badness of death, annihilation accounts, Epicurean views, and theodicies within secular thinkers, as well as some practical advice in the face of these predicaments that we find ourselves in. As always, it was a pleasure to listen to David Benatar, and thanks to Ricardo for creating such a great content with so many thinkers around the world. Another interesting video was actually a clip from the past but uploaded recently on a channel called Truth Wanted. This is a clip from a call-in show, and the reason I know that this is from the past is because it features Alex O'Connor before growing mustache and before giving up on being vegan. Alex, the host and a caller from Bolivia, discussed two topics, veganism and antinatalism. Alex brings up some very interesting points about ethics of antinatalism, and it was very enjoyable to listen to. A Turkish channel made a video in Turkish language explaining the basic concepts behind antinatalism. I could only follow from translated subtitles, but it talks about consent, suffering, life as a gift, Schopenhauer, Heidegger, and Benatar, and religious theodicies to cope with the reality of meaninglessness. Lawrence made yet another punchy video talking about various asymmetries between suffering and pleasures or good things in life. Suffering comes to us without us doing anything, but we have to strive for good things. Pains are usually more intense, they last longer, they come easily to us, and they are more common. He then turns a little Buddhist to explain why the good things are not purely good. They are mixed with some bads, and we have to be vigilant of those bads for us to enjoy the goods. I have this analogy of goods in life. They are like a cake which is mostly sweet and good, but there are pieces of fecal matter scattered within the volume of cake with such spatial distribution that it is hard to casually cut a slice which does not contain any fecal matter. And when they say that life is a gift, this is the cake that you are gifted. Anyway, that wasn't what Lawrence said. This is just what I remembered watching his video. Finally, a channel called Metaphysical Exile made a follow-up video about Buddhism. 2 weeks ago, he had made a video, Why I Am Not a Buddhist, Even Though I Am. This week, he made Why I Am a Buddhist Even Though I Am Not. This video starts and ends with a verse from Buddhist literature criticizing birth, but the rest of the video is more about pessimistic thoughts in Buddhism. That verse, blaming birth for all suffering in the world, comes originally from Vishuddhamagga, or Path to Purification, a Buddhist treatise written in 5th century in what is today Sri Lanka. It was written originally in Pali language, which is a sister language of Sanskrit. The entire poem from which this verse is taken truly blames birth and rebirth for all the suffering in the world. One point to note is that in many scriptures in Indian subcontinent, the word yoni, which literally means vagina, is also used in the sense of birth, like being born through dog yoni or taking human yoni and so on. I think both meanings must have had common origin but must have deviated in their shades later on. So in this particular poem, originally the word yoni might have been used in certain places to mean birth but was lost during English translation. Here's the English translation.